Okay, the session is now being recorded. This is Rabbi Javorowski. You don't see me on the camera right now, but we are very honored to have a very special guest speaker today, Rabbi Yisrael Izzy Stark, who is a Holocaust survivor, and he will be addressing us today with his personal memoirs from that time during the Holocaust, the destruction and the Churban of Europe, and also the liberation from the Holocaust. During the 9 days, as we are right now, it's especially appropriate to remember and to take to heart the lessons that we can learn from these tragic events in Jewish history. As we usually do, we'll have a question and answer period at the end. So without any other further ado, Rabbi Yisrael, please take it away.
Thank you very much. Recently, I was very much in demand to speak in many different places, especially so close to Tisha B'Av in the 9 days, when we are anyhow all will be availing for Tisha B'Av, will all be in availus. So I would like to usually start first. My first thing on the agenda is very important that I give a shvach v'hoidoah to the Ribono Shel Olam, that I'm still capable of remembering my experiences during the Churban Europe and able to speak about it. And of course, I would like also take a moment and thank Rabbi Levi Shlita and also Rabbi Jay, he's also known as Rabbi Raphael. Thank them very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you about this important part of history. Tisha B'Av, which in Yirtzeh Hashem is approaching us, and it will be this Sunday, is a culmination of 3 weeks, also referred to as Bein HaMetzorim. The 3 weeks start usually in Shavuos B'Tammuz, and they end with Tisha B'Av. Also, as I mentioned, known as Bein HaMetzorim, which means between the calamities that have befallen us. In this day, we all mourn the destruction of the Bayis HaRishon and Bayis HaSheni. And since we refer to every shul as a Mikdash Ma'at, a small Beis HaMikdash, and we are also referred to our tables in our homes as a Mizbeach, you may be able to imagine the enormity of the Churban of Eastern Europe, sacred and religious values, which each of us lost due to the brutal destruction by the Nazi Rotzchem, Yimach Shemam. Chaval, unfortunately, it is extremely sad that we are also reaching time of Posech v'Holech, just like in the by the candles of Hanukkah, we have the whole differences between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel of Moise v'Holech, Poise v'Holech. That means every day there's less and less individuals who actually witnessed on their own eyes, in their own experience in Churban Europe, that can stand up or sit up at the table and still tell you about something which I have witnessed and I've experienced, be'einei ro'isi ve'ozen shumati, what I'm going to tell you. But for a moment, and this is only recently, if you will, please forgive me, I wish to digress somewhat and insert a personal note. I ask you, please don't label members of the Sheres HaPleiter as Holocaust survivors. My grandchildren never introduced me to their friends in Eretz Yisrael as here comes my Zaidi, the Holocaust survivor. This is a term that has lost, unfortunately, its dedicated meaning. Have you been following the news lately? The Iraqis are Holocaust survivors. The Syrians are Holocaust survivors. And pretty soon we can expect millions of others to join in under this term. As a matter of fact, a few weeks ago, a news item in Chicago, and I heard it, announced that about 17 or 18 people were killed or wounded in a gang shootout in Chicago, but a family of 7 survived the Holocaust. So I just ask, please refer to, if you meet anybody who went through these experiences, just refer to him as a member of the Sheres HaPleita. And if you want to know the meaning of Sheres HaPleita, I will explain it to you later. Now, thank you very much for listening to my personal gripe here. Now I will return to my main subject. What I'm about to tell you, my friends, my personal view and experiences of the tremendous day-to-day Mesiras Nefesh, in many instances, not only day-to-day, but in many instances, the minute-to-minute nisyonos that I have witnessed, not as a demonstrated by, it wasn't demonstrated by great rabbinic scholars or gedolim in my midst, but rather for simple balabatim, b'nei Torah, were also businessmen, merchants, and professional people in their private lives before the war. Some of these individuals I davened with in the same base medrash when I was a small boy. These individuals, some of whose names I still remember, and some whose names I have long forgotten or never knew. Rabbi Yisroel Lau, Shlita, many years ago addressed a Sheres HaPleita gathering in Chicago, and his theme was, it is time, my friends, it is time, this is what he said, it is time to stop talking how our parents, brothers and sisters perished during the war, how they perished during the war years, but rather how did they live during that era and during that time. Not how did they live in Lodz, in Warsaw, and Munkac, or any of these places, but how did they live during when the main fight for their survival took place in many of the concentration camps that were spread all over the German and also some of the Polish territories. I want to tell you how these Kedoshim lived, not how they died. How they mounted a heroic spiritual resistance through their deeds. You have to remember, we had no clubs, we had no knives, we had no guns, and we had no bullets. We had none of these things or explosive of any kind, which is the usual key to physical resistance. We did not even possess any writing materials, like paper or books of any kind, nor any calendars or watches to tell the time of the day. These living conditions in the camps were designed by the German Roschim to demoralize us to a lower standard than the simplest animal. But what they were able, but they were not able to take from us, and they couldn't, all the material things they were taken, but they were not able to take from us was the lessons from our home, which is also comes under the Toiras Imenu, but our mothers and fathers taught us when we were little children, or the Emunas Hashem that we possessed, and also the will to survive. But before I tell you, let me give you a little background of my early growing up in a town called Munkac, which is in Eastern Europe in the Carpathian Mountains. It's also known as the area of the Carpathian Mountains. I come from a family where I was the only Ben Yochet, I was the only boy. I had 3 sisters, and my father Oliver Shalom was a Belzer Chassid. He was a Chassid of Belz, and certainly my grandparents and great-grandparents were also Hasidim of Belz, and many of them were Yoshvim in Belz, where they used to practically spend most of their time in Belz. So I went to Cheder as a small boy from different stages, let's say from starting as time when we were learning Chumash to learning also the parshas of the Chumash, the parshas of the week, and then Mishnayos and so forth. And we went from stage to stage, and it was very, very difficult in those days to acquire and really know what went on. Now, many people who listened to me ask me, what did we know and what didn't we know during this period? You have to realize that Europe started actually in 1939 during the Crystal Night. That was the beginning of it. Actually, Hitler came to power before that, but that was the beginning where they got the license to start to persecute Jews and kill them whatever they wanted, without anybody having to give any answers for this deed. And this started off, of course, Poland was invaded in the end of 1940, towards the end of 1940, approximately November, December, and they immediately started out bombing and killing concentrations of Jews in Warsaw and Lodz and all the bigger cities. Fortunately, we were not touched from our homes because the Germans did not occupy our territory. Our territory was given back by the Yamach Shemoy by Hitler, was given back to Hungary, because before World War I, it belonged to the Hungarian Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So, but there was a condition that they demanded from the Hungarian king. He says, we are not going to come in and march in and occupy your country, but you have Jews living in your midst. And we want you to not to be acting very kindly to these Jews. We want you to start taking away their rights and taking away their licenses for making a living. And sure enough, they started doing this. But it was in but we were occupied by the Hungarians was only in 1944. So in 1944, we were occupied by the Hungarians. No, 1940, I'm sorry. We were not occupied by the Hungarians in 1940. And we were not taken away from our homes actually till 1944. So meanwhile, but they did carry out their Tanai, their demand, and they took away all our rights from professionals. And if you were in business, they took away business licenses and so forth. So it started off, but my friends, we were still going to sleep every night in our own beds. And this was the key to survival, at least till we got to Auschwitz. Even though many times I remember we went to sleep, including myself and probably many other children and individuals, went to sleep with hunger pains and gnawing away at them. But nevertheless, as I said, we still went to sleep in our own beds and wake up in the morning in our own beds. But this changed very soon. When did it change? It changed in 1944, or approximately a day after Achron Shel Pesach. That it changed. Why? Why did it change? Because this time, Yamach Shemoy, the Hitler regime, decided that they cannot trust the Hungarian Empire anymore. There are certainly Jews still sitting in their homes. So they physically occupied Hungary. They marched into Hungary just like they marched into Poland and they marched into Czechoslovakia and to many of the other Eastern European countries, the same way they marched into our area, which was called Eastern Europe or the Carpathian Mountains. And most of the Hungarian Jews, which numbered close to 500,000 Jews, at least 470 or 480,000 nefashos, the moment they met Achron Pesach, we had a knock on our door. And I heard it was early in the morning, my parents opened the door and I heard the following order given by 2 Hungarian gendarmes and 1 German officer. The following order was, we give you 1 hour to pack, and you can take whatever you can carry only in 1 hour and report to the shul backyard, which was approximately about only maybe 3 or 4 houses from us, and report in the shul backyard and so forth. So my friends, when somebody tells you you have 1 hour to pack and take only what you can carry, I mean, my mother didn't have any fancy suitcase or something, so she opened up a big bed sheet and she started throwing in articles of clothing. So I mentioned to you before, it was Achron Shel Pesach. It was the morning of Achron Shel Pesach. We still didn't put away our Pesach dishes. There certainly wasn't much food in the house because there wasn't much food for that Pesach period. But nevertheless, she threw in whatever she felt she can throw in those few minutes under these conditions into that bundle. She bundled it up. And while she was doing this, my 2 sisters decided that they are going to run away. They're not going to follow the order. They're not going to report in the backyard of the synagogue like we were told to. So had our house. The back of our house was adjacent to a big forest area. So my sisters went out through the back window into this forest area, and they didn't tell us that they're not going to report that place. So actually, my mother gathered up her bundle, and off we went to the report to the shul backyard, like we were told to. Of course, my mother was very distraught. She was very upset because she didn't see the 2 daughters. But after about a half an hour or 3/4 of an hour, I look at the distance and I say, Mommy, the girls are coming. They're approaching us. They're also going to join us. They did join us, and they said there was no place to hide. There was no place to go. Nobody was helping us. So whatever happened to you will happen to us also. And sure enough, they marched us into a place called it was a brick factory. There was not an operation. And there was the temporary ghetto. It was the ghetto for this particular city, for the city of Munkaj, which had another ghetto, also a brick factory on the other side. They marched us in there, and they told us that we are going to be there to settle down there best we can. We did so, and I don't remember, my friends, whether it was a 10 days or a week or less or more, but eventually they again gave us an order to line up outside from those kilns that they settled on and so forth. Another point I want to make, the reason why they made that particular ghetto in the brick factory that was not in operation at that time, is because first of all, it belonged to Jewish owners, and secondly, they had those boxcars, the railroad boxcars, could come and ride into the factory. So eventually, when they would have to transport us out, they will not have to schlep us to, I don't know, to another train siding and so forth. And sure enough, they eventually lined us up and told us to mount each family to get in, let's say about 60, 70, sometimes 80 or more individuals into a boxcar. And they told us, don't worry, you gotta be ruhig, you gotta be easy. We're taking you to a Hungarian farms to do some work in Hungarian farms. The families will be together and so forth. But eventually, as the train started moving, and as I said, each boxcar was so filled with individual people that sometimes people who were sitting couldn't get up, and sometimes the people who were standing couldn't sit down. But nevertheless, each boxcar, if you picture those empty boxcar, has a little triangular window, like I pictured in my book. Each boxcar had a triangular window, and they lifted me up and they asked me to look out. Yingele, Shrulek, why don't you look out through those windows? Because the train that was transporting us had a tendency to slow down when I approached a main railroad or a main station. So tell us, read off the name of that station. And sure enough, every time the train slowed down, I read off the name of the station, and pretty soon I could see from the faces of the ones that occupy those boxcars that we are not moving towards some Hungarian farms to do some work, but we are moving towards Auschwitz. I don't know whether it was 2 or 3 days or less or more. Eventually, we arrived to Auschwitz, and the train came to a standstill. And I was still, again, they lifted me up and I'm looking out that rectangular window again. And they asked me, what do you see now, Thrulik? And I says, I think that this is the end of our journey. It feels like that train is slowing down for good, not passing on a station. And I also see a platform on the side with a tremendous amount of suitcases, and bundles, and all kinds of stuff over there. Sure enough, they opened, the train came to a complete halt, and they opened up the doors, sliding doors, and the air, suddenly the air hit us, and we came to life, so to speak, because of the fresh air that came into these boxcars. And the word Aussteigen was given. And everybody immediately had to disembark, and immediately people started getting off, including my 2 sisters. Everybody started getting off from our boxcar, except I noticed my mother in a little distance, noticed me, wait, Thrulik. And my father was standing in the other corner, and he also was not moving. Pretty soon I see everybody got off that boxcar except my mother and my father and myself. So we were 3 still occupying that empty boxcar. My mother called me over and said, Thrulik, come here. She opened up the bundle that she had, the bed sheet, and she started taking out articles of clothing and putting upon me articles of clothing. And I asked her mother, why are you doing this? And she says, because you see, the platform is full of clothing and bundles and suitcases. We have to leave everything there. And maybe while you have in your purse, maybe you can carry. And then she was doing that, a young man who was working at the transport, the arrival of this Hungarian transports to Auschwitz. A young man passed by, and he was in charge of these arrivals, and he looked into the empty boxcar, and he got very angry. And he says, Yidene, he says, woman, you were told to get off. Why are you still there? And he says, you got to get off immediately. And he went to check another car, 2 or 3 in front of us, but he finally returned. We couldn't trust us that we are actually going to get off. He mounted the boxcar and he came up. And finally he looks at my mother, he says, woman, he will not be needing this. Why are you doing this? And she says, noch a minute. And she stopped doing it. And finally, he looks at me and he says, Ingele, wie alt bist du? As a little boy, how old are you? And I said, I'm 14. I'm 14 years old. And he looks at me and says, die bist nicht 14, die bist 18. He makes it a very important point. And I started arguing with him. I says, if I'm 14, why should I be 18? And he finally, again, he puts my finger on my chest and says, Ingele, du fragt mir nicht kein Kasches. Here we do not ask any question. If you are, I tell you, you are 18, you're 18, now get off. Certainly, my father handed me the film and we got off. But this is the first time, according to my view of what is going on here, what is the Rebbeinu Shloim going to do with me? First time that I felt that even my time has come. Why? Because after a few hours, they finally lined us up. They separated the men and the women, and they lined us up. And my father was in front of me, and I don't know whether it was the well-known Malach HaMoves Mengele called, or it was some other Malach HaMoves sitting there and asked my father the first question, "Wie alt bist du? How old are you?" And the next question was, "Kannst du arbeiten? Can you work?" And he says, "Jawohl." And he motioned to him to go to a certain direction. My turn came after the back of my father, and I again had all this clothing upon me, and I was a little taller than the average 14-year-old boy. And he looks at me and he says, "Wie alt bist du?" And I could hear and see in front of me that young man that I've never learned his name. I never saw him again. And I said, 18. And the next question was, "Kannst du arbeiten?" And I say, "Jawohl." And he says, motions to me to follow the same direction as my father. Pretty soon, we all arrived at a big, like an airplane hangar, a big empty barrack, where they were prisoners working, and they lined us up and they told us to undress completely. And these undressed, this is why I gave up my film. That was the last time I gave up my film that I was holding on dearly because my father told me to hold on to it. And I broke down and I started crying and I said to my father, "Boy Shalom will have to forgive me. And you will have to forgive me that I cannot hold on to this anymore. We don't have any, the only thing we were permitted to hold on is to our shoes." So I said we didn't have any watches, we didn't have any paper, any pencils and so forth. So from there, I tried to find out, as I asked one of these barbers that clipped us, that was taking off our hair. I says, "Was wird sein mit uns?" He says, what is going to happen to us? Nobody would talk. They wouldn't talk. Finally, I came to one and I says, "Maybe tell me something." And he says, "Drei de Charum," he says, "Turn around." I turned one way and turned the other way, and he had still the clipper going, and he says, "You see this table with all this striped clothing? You're going to get this clothing, which was a pair of pants, a shirt, and a jacket, and a jacket, and a mitzvah, one of those caps. And right now," he says, "right now your fight for survival is going to start." That was all he told me. Sure enough, we came in, they marched us into Birkenau, which part of Auschwitz. Now they gave us into a barrack, they put us in a barrack. And I was with my father together, and we were just sitting around for almost a week or longer, not being assigned to any work. Eventually, of course, that ended because, again, they lined us up. They gave us a little piece of bread, and this time they loaded us up again into a boxcar. This time, the next station was another camp called Mauthausen. Mauthausen was a terrible, terrible camp. It was a death camp. And Mauthausen, again, Mauthausen basically was a concentration camp where all these transports that came in there, they eventually distributed it to many different areas, smaller camps, concentration camps, where the prisoners were appointed to do work in different factories or mines and so forth for the Reich, for the German Reich, for their war efforts. So that was basically what Mauthausen was. But it was also a terrible death camp because the life of a prisoner didn't mean anything. And for the slightest thing, they killed you. So, but there, I got my number. My number was that I got over there was 68,818. It was given to me in a little piece of cloth, all marked as you see it, because this is still the original thing, the way I took it off from all my uniform when I was liberated. And the man who handed me that number says, "Little boy, right now your name is not anymore Stark. Your name is not Storch anymore," which was my name. He says, "Your name is 68,818. And that I remember very distinctly, because my name, if anybody wanted to call me or address me from, let's say at work, like so forth, or the blockouts for somebody, you can imagine when they called 68,818 or 68, any number, it wasn't for a good reason. It was always sometimes to punish you. So basically, that was my number. And right now, they transported us from Mauthausen. There was another terrible thing happened. They told us, they counted us about 5 or 6 times a day. And each time you had to line up 5 in a row. And my father was always managed to be next to me. But this time, my father was about 5 rows in front of me. I was about 5 rows in the back. And I was afraid to ask some of the other prisoners to change places, because if they would, that was a dangerous thing to do. I figured eventually they'll let us again disassemble and we'll get back to my father. But it didn't happen. This time, some German, again, Malchamovas came and put the hand 3 rows in front of me and said, "Abtreten," that means disembark. So my father was in that particular group in the front of me. And of course, they marched away and I never saw him again in my life. And eventually I ended up in another third concentration camp called Melk. Melk was already the place where I felt this is where we have to, but like this barber told me, this is where the fight for survival is really going to start. And sure enough, it started. I have to tell you, and this is what I told you, I'm going to tell you how these Kedoshim, how they lived, not how they died. These are the things that I witnessed in milk. I was there almost a year, a little bit, maybe over a year. This was the third camp. Of course, I missed my father. But I will tell you, I had Emunas Hashem many, many times that happened in Melt or before, where I felt this is the end of my life for some reason. I cannot tell you all the details in a half an hour or in 3/4 of an hour. But many times I felt this, something is going on here. The Rebbeinu Shalom wants me to survive, because but I felt the end is here. I said, something else happened that saved me. And a few things, you have to realize that, again, as I mentioned, we didn't have anything, any material things. But if somebody still wanted to know for some reason, want to know whether it's Shavuos B'Tammuz, let's say, or whether it's Chodesh Av or Chodesh Elul, or whether it's whatever day it is, whether it's Monday or Tuesday, because we had no energy and no need to keep track of what. Once in milk, we just were appointed to go to work. Each one had a task to do at work. Most of the prisoners in my barrack, their job was to advance in a mountain and drill with pressure hammers into the mountain. Fortunately, the mountain was not solid stone; it was sand and pebbles, and there was a conveyor belt running into the tunnels that they managed to advance, and all the other prisoners were standing there and shoveling all the debris. They were shoveling back onto the conveyor belt, and the conveyor belt was carried out of the tunnels. My job was given to me at that time was the Spitzenträger, the carrier of the pointers. What pointers did I carry? Because as I mentioned to you before, the prisoners that were working, advancing in the tunnel, deeper and deeper, they had to drill in these air hammers. And these air hammers had steel pointers, but after a while, these steel pointers got dull and they didn't do the job the way it was supposed to. So my job was to gather together all these steel pointers and take it out of the tunnel, carry it out, because there could not be a fire going inside the tunnels. So I had to carry it out to a blacksmith that I got very friendly with, and he sharpened those pointers, steel pointers in the fire, and then sharpened them. Then I carried them back in the street again. It was a tremendous advantage, my friend, for me to have access to fire. Tremendous, because if somebody found sometimes a old bone someplace or a rotten potato, it tasted much better once it was put on the fire and made it. I also found out when I was a little boy at home yet, people that suffered from dysentery, I heard that the refuah for this was coal dust. And the biggest problem in the concentration camp, my friends, was dysentery. Many people came down, and many lost their lives with it because they couldn't control it. Anyhow, I finally told the blacksmith, let me take some wood and burn it, and then I will extinguish it and let it cool off and scrape off the dust, the coal dust, the black dust from these pieces of wood, and distribute it to some friends and see maybe it will help them with the machla of dysentery. And sure enough, I'll tell you, the only problem was I didn't have where to put it, where to package it, didn't have any paper. So the blacksmith again gave me a good idea. He says, you see there in this big leaves growing. So why don't you tear off some of these leaves and package it that way? But nevertheless, I have seen many prisoners that sort of came back to life, and they did not have to end up in the Revere, which was the hospital, where many who had that machla, who had never this disease, they checked in but never checked out. I don't know of anybody that ever checked into the Revere or to the hospital that ever checked out. So basically, the other thing that we also were very fortunate, as I mentioned before, somebody wanted to know what day it is, or somebody wants to know what Chodesh it is. So we had couple the calendar, couple the keeper of the calendar. Couple was mamash a computer. Any question you had, what date is this? When is Rosh Chodesh, or when is Shavuos B'Tamas, or when is Tisha B'Av? For some reason, it didn't make a difference to most people. Didn't make a difference to me. But the couple always knew the answer. At one time, I found out that really couple did know, because I want to tell you again how they lived. I want to give you the story that happened to me with the Sukkah with Weber. Once I was coming out from the tunnels, from the tunnels, but carrying my pointers. And as I stepped out, there was a sunny day, beautiful day, and finally Weber was standing there and said, "Srulik, you got to come with me." And I said to Weber, "You must have hidden some food. You got to share it with me. I mean, where are you taking me?" He says, "Then just come with me." And he says, "But we cannot walk straight up because you're not supposed to be there where I'm taking you." He was at the end of these conveyor belt ended, and whatever fell off, all debris fell off from those conveyor belts, he was shoveled it into a little steel cart. And there was finally we're crawling along, and finally he points to a broken down steel cart in the distance, and he says, "Srulik, we are going to crawl in there." And I says, "Oh, you are smart, Weber. You must have hidden some food in there." Oh, wonderful. And finally, we reached that broken cart, steel cart, and they crawled in there, and I took the pointers on my shoulder because they were very, and it was a hot day outside. And I said, "Weber, it's so nice and cool. Now show me, where did you hide the food?" And he says, "I don't have any food." And I says, "Well, it's nice and cool in here." And I look up and I see branches on top of the broken down cart. And I say, "Weber, yeah, what is this? Is this a sukkah?" He says, "Srulik, this is our sukkah." I says, "Weber, what do you mean this is a sukkah?" He says, "I thought, can you imagine what a sukkah without any food? We don't have anything. I'm starving." Can you remember what we had sukkahs at all? We both sat down, we started. The main topic, my friends, was always to discuss whatever we tasted, whatever we had while we were still under normal circumstances. We were all believed maybe it's going to still our hunger for a moment, just discussing this. So that was main discussion, was always trying to discuss what we ate when we were able to do it. So he says, "No, Srulik, I'm sorry, I don't have any food." But it says, "You know what? We will make a brocha leyeshe besukkah." And we were the only ones, you and me, will be mekayim the mitzvah of leyeshe besukkah, making such a brocha. I didn't argue with him. I says, "Weber, I think you're all right. But I'm saying I still wish we would have something like I remember we had at home." So we both burst out crying, and we said, "Leyeshe besukkah," and we left crawling back. So you can imagine again, Weber was not one of the big rabbonim in our town, or was not. Weber was a merchant, a shoe merchant, and yet he was absolutely put his life in danger to be mekayim while mitzvah of sukkah. And this is something which is just a small example of many other things that happen in many other camps that I hear about, that I did not witness, many that I hear about. And also, I want to tell you one more thing. I want to tell you about an incident when we marched us in after work. They marched us into you have to realize that the camp was only the barracks where we were sleeping, and they gave us whatever they were dishing out, whether it was a gemiza or something, rotten vegetables, or a soup made with some caraway seeds in the morning, whatever. But the work was done outside of the camp. So they had to transport us to the work and bring us back. So basically, we work sometimes at the day shift, sometimes we were assigned to work in the night shift. And with night shift, where I had a terrible accident that happened to me, again, when I thought this is the end of my life, and for some reason, without any explanation how it could have happened, I was saved. And I could see again, I said, maybe, just maybe you want me to survive. I have to believe that you want me to survive. And therefore, I have to do my best to fight for survival. And I have not only done it myself, my friends, but I've also encouraged all my friends in any way we could, with all my friends, encourage other people also try and fight for survival, because otherwise it was the end. If somebody came to me and says, why are you telling me to fight to survive? I mean, I don't have the koyach, I don't have the stamina, I don't have the, why are you encouraging me? Don't you see what's going on? Turn around, see that pile, we're all gonna end up over there. I says, look here, I says, my friend, I am not a Novi. I don't know more that you do. And the reason I'm telling you to survive is because there is a war going on. I says, before we were brought here, we already knew that those Roshim lost the war. I said, the war must be coming to an end. Maybe it will happen tomorrow. Maybe it will happen 2 weeks from now, maybe a chodesh from now. But if you give up now and you say there's no use to go on and try to survive, then you're not going to make it. So in most cases, I think maybe they listened. But as we came into camp and after we were counted and given our portion of whatever food they gave us, suddenly there was whispering going around. Every time there was whispering going around, I knew something is up, something happened. So I say to my friends, well, let's find out some whispering, what is going on. So finally somebody told me, do you know, Srulik, tonight is Yom Kippur. It's Yom Kippur night tonight. And I says, well, same thing I asked when I left that crawled out from the broken down little cart. And I turned to Weber and says, Weber, what makes you so sure there was sukkah today? He says, I checked the couple. The couple was never wrong. So again, I heard that couple confirmed that it's Kippur night. So they gave us the little gabiz or the little hot soup and so forth, and we all went to sleep. But this time, everybody went to sleep in a different mood. Everywhere, including myself, I went to sleep and I said, this time I'm going to sleep. I slept on a higher bunk. I'm going to sleep, but I'm going to in my mind, I'm going to go through what was Yom Kippur night in my home when I was a little boy. Where did I dam Yom Kippur night? What was the tefillas like? Who said the tefillas? My father, I want you to know, was about tefillah every human room, every this. So I was standing next to him. So I'm leaning back and I'm starting to feel again, trying to still my hunger pains about what Erev Yom Kippur was like. And suddenly I hear a voice starting cold, niederei. And I'm laying down and I'm saying to myself in my mind, say, that's not my father's voice. Why do I hear somebody else's kol nidrei? That's not the nisach of my father. And then I hear another tefillah. I mean, also from Yom Kippur night. See, every time any prisoner that remembered any tefillah of Yom Kippur by heart was asked to say, this is what I found out later, because when all this was going on, to me, it was like a dream. I didn't realize that it's actually taken place, because I eventually started to hear all these tefillahs. The only thing in my mind went through, and I says, I don't understand why it's not my father's nisach. If I remember my father's nisach, and that was something which I started asking myself. Anyhow, I woke up, I fell asleep, and I wake up in the morning and I turn to my friends on the bunk and I says, do you want to hear what happened last night? He says, what are you telling us? I says, well, I fell asleep and I dreamt. And I heard somebody, the whole tefillahs from Kippur night, starting with Kol Nidre and all the next and so forth. And I said, what do you mean? I says,
okay,
you
I
dreamt.
hear him.
What do you mean you dreamt?
I'm in the meeting already.
Yeah, that was my dream. He says, no, it was no dream. It took place right here. He says, you probably fell asleep in the midst of it, but this is what happened here. And I says, Fritz, the Blockhelster didn't come bring in the Roshim with rifles and so forth and annihilated us. He says, no, it all happened. And he says, you fell asleep, but we were still up till quite almost one tefillah after another. Can you imagine the Chesed Hashem, Chazdei Hashem, that we have people that would still remember these tefillahs, and we had a mamash a Kippur night this. Of course, fasting was out of the question. It was never came into account. So imagine this was, my friends, the Yom Kippur night. And again, many other things which I mentioned before has somehow appeared in the midst of my trying to survive. And I said to myself, I must try my best just to go on. And of course, after that, after the Allies were approaching us, and finally we were in danger of falling in the hands of the approaching armies. Again, they emptied out the camp and they marched us off to a fourth camp called Ebensee. Ebensee again was already in the mountains on Austrian mountains. It was a very beautiful place, but it was also very cold because I think they started out marching us about maybe 1,500 prisoners. Some they went different ways, many different. They divided us up, but I was in a group which they marched us by foot, and I think of the 1,500, maybe 550 or 600 arrived to Ebensee. The rest never made it on the trip, on the march, so to speak. So we arrived in Ebensee, and the Ebensee already, they did not assign us to work again, but they also did not give us this, maybe only one ration in 3 days. So people were starving for hunger and so forth. But one morning, I look out from my barracks from my window, and I look up from my barracks and I see the arrival, and I hear also in the distance noise of war. I hear machine guns going, and also many other explosions and so forth. And finally, they told us to line up again on the Pelplatz. That was the last time they asked us to line up. And in fact, there was they counted us over and over again. There was one person missing, and one person missing, they had counted us about 5 or 6 times. The one missing was finally also ended up with me here in Chicago. And he was also here. He's already, unfortunately, he already this. And he was here with me. And in fact, we had many of the Dafyomis together with him. And maybe rest in peace. And so I looked out and I saw already, I looked at this here, arrival of the advanced American patrol. We were standing at the gates, and as the Americans arrived, I looked up and I saw that the guard towers that were surrounding the camp were already empty of the machine guns and the SS troops that were usually guarding us. So I turned to my friends and I says, there's a change here. See, there's civilians standing. There are no more SS standing there with machine guns. They're civilians. Plus the sound of war, we immediately knew that this is finally maybe liberation came. Liberation was a very, very important moment, my friends. I can speak sometimes, I don't know how long have I been speaking already, over a half an hour? I'll tell you, I can speak about liberation alone. I can speak about many hours. Well, I just want to tell you that what happened during liberation, because liberation was arrival of the advanced American patrol, which we were standing at the gate, the one who could still stand up. I was standing with my friends. We were skin and bone, but we were able to stand up. Thank God we didn't have any of the machlas which went on in the camp, like typhus and the dysentery. So we were standing there waiting. This is time of liberation. And sure enough, as the Americans approached the gates of the camp, pleas for food, with promise of the Army Field Kitchen arrival to dispense fresh food. This is the promise that the American Army gave us. After 6 or 8 hours, 2 long lines formed in the camp, a Pelplatz. The Pelplatz, again, was the empty spot where they used to count us day and night. So one behind, and also Army U.S. Kitchen arrived there, and the Army Kitchen, they started up and they started dishing out freshly cooked rice with fat bacon, hundreds of famished, liberated prisoners, my friends, killed over that, while still holding spoonfuls of this mixture in their mouth. because their digestive system was so shrunk. And suddenly the Americans gave out dished out that food, and the digestive system couldn't take it. It's just almost like exploded. And I tell you, my friends, as much as me and my friends who were my age, we were about 7 boys, constantly giving chizuk to each other, and also giving chizuk to other prisoners. We all would gladly have sold our lives for a loaf of bread. No doubt about it. Somebody would approach us and say, Srulik, here is a loaf of bread. You can eat as much as you want, but we will shoot you or hang you in the morning. I would make the deal. There's no doubt about it. But as they were dishing out and we see this happening, we noticed another line about 100 meters away. And finally, I said to my friends, what are they distributing in this line? Let's go and see. We should not, as much as we are hungry, as much as we would sell our lives for a bite of food, I wouldn't let you eat from this thing. Let's leave this line and see what's going on the other line. My friends, as we approach the other line, what was given away at the other line, about 100 meters away, was Chaim, was life. Life with Hurav Sheila Greenwald, Sheila Greenwald was the Chisteruf. He was holding a Teret and Teret Shalyat, which was already open by the seams, but the Parshiat was still there. And everybody was approaching the Teret Shalyat, including my turn came. And I picked up that Shalyat and held it close to my heart, and I made a brucha, l'honiach al mitzvahs tefillin. And I burst out crying, and I said to myself, this is the last thing that I gave up while I was standing naked, and I gave up everything else. And this is the first thing at the liberation, first thing came to my hand, that I can make a bracha over this mitzvah. And sure enough, it saved us from having taken part in any of this. The Americans very soon realized the tremendous mistake that they made by dishing out this food, and they finally stopped, and they told the prisoners that there is another field kitchen coming in, and this time they're going to they distributed powdered milk with farina or oatmeal, which the digestive system could tolerate. And a lot of prisoners slowly started eating this and coming to their life. That was something that could be tolerated. So this was also a big part of time of liberation. Also, my friends, I must point out the Lefi Anias Dati. According to my humble opinion, I have been comparing liberation from the concentration camps by the Sheres HaPleita, not only in our camp, but there were hundreds of other satellite camps where some were still alive and were liberated at that moment, which was date-wise, it was May the 6th, 1945. And we were standing there, and I compared this in my mind parallel to Amid Bahar Sinai. Like the people who came out from Yosi Mitzrayim, who just came out from Mitzrayim and saw all those miracles that happened in Mitzrayim. They were standing now for Kabbalah Satoira. And the Rebbeinu Shalom took the mountain and held us over them by Matan Torah. We know held it kechigas like a barrel. And the Rebbeinu Shalom said, if you accept the Torah, fine. If not, Sham tiyeh kiburaschem. This is what the Torah tells us. And the question is, why did Rebbeinu Shalom have to threaten them to accept the Torah? Good and fine. If not, Sham tiyeh kiburaschem. Didn't I say Nasi Benishma? Yes, they did. But most of them wanted to accept only Torah Shebeksav, but they not want to accept Torah Shebal Peh. Torah that our Rabbonim and our Gedolim are going to tell us, this is what a mitzvah is, and this is how we interpret it, and this is what the Geder is, and so forth. So again, and I say the comparison in the parallel, tremendous parallel, when they're standing liberated next to me, hundreds of prisoners, not all Jewish, of course, they were all different nationalities, but some of the Jews said, once our hungers hunger pains were stilled already. We started taking a little inventory. Ma Kara, what happened here? Where's my brother? Where's my sister? Where's my father? Where's my uncle Moshe? Where's my uncle Bassal? And we started thinking, what is going to be our future? All right, now we survive, fine. We already are not hungry. We survive. What is going to be next? There was no cell phones to call Munkash and say, hey, did my sister come home or something? There was no such thing. And if one, so everybody had only in mind one thing. I have to go back to my birthplace. I have to go back and see whether Uncle Moshe or Uncle Yankel or my wife or my daughter came back. That's the only way I'll find out, because no other way to communicate right after the war. So I'm saying that so many of the liberated prisoners, some said, "Cholila less them less dying." There's no Rabbi Shalom. Why something like this he could tolerate? There were some who said that, of course, but not, fortunately, not too many. There were also who said, "Listen, I'm going to be a good Jew. I'm not going to kill. I'm going to honor my parents and my fathers and so forth. But I'm not interested in all these mitzvahs that we have to do as Jews with like fasting on Tisha B'Av and all. No, that's not for me. There are some who said that too, just like a time of Kabbalah Satorah. But fortunately, we also had a shliach like Rav Yekasiel Halberstam's Chisa Yegudolayim. And we also had a shliach like Rabbi from Cincinnati, Rabbi Silver from Cincinnati, and also many shliachim from Eretz Yisrael who told us, brothers and sisters, Am Yisrael, you are now liberated. You are going now somehow trying to go back to your birthplace. But we are not going back only to our place in order for us to remain Jews, in order for us to be viable again. We have to go back to the Messiah of our parents, the Messiah of our teachers and our Rabbonim, and Mekayim line again, the mitzvahs like we were taught when we were small children. Our friends, again, I compare this many times also to the time of Purim, the time when we said, Kimu v'kiblu mashi kiblu kvar. When Am Yisrael, in the time of Mordechai and Esther, where Mekayim again, they reconfirmed the Kabbalah Satorah. The same thing I maintain, my friends, that at the time of liberation, when thousands of prisoners, which I call Sheres HaPleita, I don't call them survivors, I call Sheres HaPleita, were standing liberated and with their hunger pains already stilled, and now they were trying to take a dinner cheshbon, makara, what happened here. I say many of them said there is no other way, and listen to those chachomim, that there's no other way except we have to go back to our Messiah that we were taught as children. And my friends, believe Shem Sufek, that the fact that we have today Koilelim in Talmud Torahs in Chicago and in Milwaukee and in South Bend and in Eretz Yisrael in New York and in Lakewood is only because, again, Kimu v'kiblu mashi kiblu kwar. Because Am Yisrael, when these Sheres HaPleita were standing liberated, they again decided we have to go back to our Messiah that our parents taught us. Thank you very much. And if there's any questions, I'll be glad to answer a question. Is there any question? Yes.
Who was your friend that was missing and that you learned about yoga with him?
I'm sorry, I didn't
Who
hear.
was your friend that moved to Chicago that was the guy that was missing?
My friend. I mentioned my friend. He was I'll tell you in a minute. He was it was sort of escaped me my name, but I'll tell you in a minute. Good question, right? I should have mentioned his name. I should have had written it down. Yeah, he was. What's his first name? No, Jack Reese was. But Jack Reese was my friend. No, he was also. Jack Reese was not in the camp with me. Jack Reese was on the ship coming to Chicago with me. We got off together in New York with Jack Reese together, and we became friends since then. But the one who was here in Chicago was
Is
he
it
was
Mr.
from
Farkas?
Pressburg,
Mr. Farkas?
originally from Pressburg. Oh, huh? Gottesman, no. No, not Gottesman. No, we had a share together every morning. Why did this
Mr.
sleep my escape?
Farkas.
Oh, gewalt.
Mr. Schwartz?
No.
Mr.
No,
Fark,
he has, who, you know, who his son, who his grandson is? Grandson is, sometimes my this, his grandson is,
they wanted to know if it was Mr. Farkas.
Farkas. His name was Farkas.
Peggy's father.
What?
Peggy Mauer's father. Peggy Mauer's father.
Peggy Mauer's, right. Peggy Mauer's father. Yeah. Yisroel Farkas was his name. He
Yeah.
was in Chicago when I came. He was in. We were to camp together. He was the one when they counted us again and again. He was missing, and you don't ask where he was hiding. But he Yisroel Farkas. Okay. Yes, I went back to Munkach. It took us a long time because I'll tell you, the American says you want to go home, can only take you up to Pilsen. Pilsen is part of Czechoslovakia. They couldn't even take us to Prague because Prague was already supposed to be, according to the Yalta agreement that they had with Stalin and all the others in Roosevelt. The Americans would only occupy up to Pilsen, and the rest, the Russians would come in and liberate Prague, which cost about 5,000 lives because the Americans could have been there about 5 or 6 days earlier. Anyhow, this is what they made up their mind. So in order to get back, there was no, first of all, there was no communication whatsoever. There were no cell phones to pick up, okay? And then there was no trains going, there were no airplanes going, there were no buses going. Everything was destroyed, bombed out, and so forth. The only thing that was moving very slowly was some railroad cars, again, some boxcars with Russian military transports. And finally, as we got we got to Pilsen, which is part of Czechoslovakia, we asked them whether we could travel as boys. We can travel on the roofs of those boxcars, and they gave us permission. So we gathered together there about 5 or 6 boys on 2 of these boxcars, and we were traveling sitting on the roof there, which was okay. The train didn't move at 100 miles an hour. That train moved about 30, 40 kilometers an hour, maybe even slower, because of the destroyed railroad tracks and so forth. So consequently, we finally got to Prague, and Prague, which was the capital of Czechoslovakia, there they gave us already some clay kodesh. They gave us sidurim, they gave us film, and they gave us some clothing, and they gave us also some money. So the next plan was to get to Budapest. And once we got to Budapest, in Budapest, we all got there. We got already some more of the material things, and there it was a big in Budapest. There was a big like an empty spot in a shul backyard, where people who passed by Budapest, Yankel Moshe from Hust, passed by here and this date and put his name on. So there were hundreds of, if not thousands of names listed, and people who passed by usually went through these names. Maybe I will feel my uncle. Many of them found their brothers, many of them found their sisters, and many of them found their parents or their wives listed already on the way home. I was already back in Munkach, and I didn't know that my sister survived. But till about after 3 weeks being in Munkach, I got sick with pleurisy, and I was in the hospital there. And somebody comes and told me, "Trulek, do you know that your sisters are alive?" And I said, "Yeah, I cannot believe it." And he says, we saw their names listed in Budapest. Sure enough, a few days later, they appeared and we got together again. And the biggest thing that my sisters gave me at that time, my older sister, when I mentioned before that they went out through the back window, my two sisters, the older one said to the younger one, her name was Yoli, says, why don't you go back again to the house and bring out my mother's lighter, silver candlesticks, and bring out her earrings, and bring out my father's becher. And she dug a hole right under that window in the ground, and she buried that right there. And when she came back, we didn't know about it. She never told us when she joined us in the shul backyard. She never told us that she did this. But at the time we came back, she showed me that she recovered those things from that. So when I have pictures of these items in the book of my father's becher, I have here and so forth. I have in this book all these items the way because that's how it was saved. The pictures that I have is my grandfather had a sister in Brooklyn who was living in Brooklyn on that main thoroughfare. I forgot the name of it again. And she, when heard that I arrived in New York, she found out through the I think the Children's Bureau, to the Federation, my name was there. And so she came, invited me and Jack Reese together. We went to she wanted to show us up to her friends and so forth. So the biggest matana she could have given me, she handed me an envelope with pictures that she got from my father, which was she was a sister here in America. I got my father's from home, and that pictures I have. So that is the pictures that I have here in the book. By the way, this book is available. Anybody that wants it, you know about it. It is available. It's like the Kohen Gadol said when he went when he read the Torah in the Hechel Beis Mikdash. He says, "Yosef Mashe shekusafti kan Moshe Mashe kuru kusafti." More than what I have told you about is written in here. So if you want it, you can always get it. Any other questions? Feel free to ask a question. Yeah, the book is available in some bookstores, most bookstores, and also in Amazon. They have it. Yeah, but I'm so upset as I forgot the name of my well once she married. And the other one was Marilus's grandson. I was thinking because Marilus's grandson was married to one of the. Yes, my friend.
Of your immediate family, how many survived?
Of whose family?
Immediate family.
Of my immediate family? My family, the follow here, I can tell it you on the fingers. My two sisters survived. Yeah. And then one of a daughter and a son of a sister of my father in Munkash, they survived. That's two cousins survived. And some very few distant relatives, but that's it. That's it. But right now, Baruch Hashem says, I have, thank God, I don't count, but I think I may have about 50 or more grandchildren. And I have about maybe 18 or it's every month it's multiple. I have about 15 or 18 great grandchildren. So this is in a way is also just like I mentioned before. We have now Baruch Hashem all these Moedas HaTorah that is all over, and Moishlech and Yankelech and Ruchelech are all filled to capacity, and all these Moedas HaTorah, the same thing. It's a little bit of a. Can you imagine when I was standing liberated again? Did they ever think that I'm going to have grandchildren and great grandchildren? But Baruch Hashem, He gave it to me. So, any other question? How did I end up in Chicago? Very good question, because after liberation, I have only one thing in my mind, and I was fighting for one thing with my sisters who told me that they plan to go to America. I said, there's nobody should ever think even of going to America. We all have to go to Eretz Yisrael. That's the only place for us. in the world. And we have to go back to Eretz Yisrael and build our lives over there and start new generations in Eretz Yisrael. And I was making speeches already in the young, in the age of 16, 17, and 18 about the importance of going to Eretz Yisrael. I joined a kibbutz, a religious kibbutz. They promised me, Yisrael, like you will go on. There was only Aliyah bet. There was no legitimate, nobody, the English issued maybe about 100 or a few hundred certificates that you could legally go to Eretz Yisrael. That was a joke. So basically, most of the people that got to Eretz Yisrael came through what they call Aliyah bet. And I joined this kibbutz, and I really seriously was only for one reason. They promised me, Yisrael, like you are going to be next to go on this Aliyah bet. Next, a time came, another time came when they promised me, third, fourth, and they always kept on postponing it. We need you here in the kibbutz. So they wouldn't say, but I got so, and my sisters who were already also in a DP camp in Germany, they saw a notice on a wall, a paper that any boy that was liberated, that is in the age between 15 and 20, can go to America. And who's sponsoring? Who do you think sponsored us? I came with that, Mrs. Roosevelt. Mrs. Roosevelt issued about 700 affidavits for young boys and girls who survived. Very few girls survived that age to come to America. So I got suddenly, but I was in kibbutz in Leipheim, which was a DP camp. I get suddenly a letter. Israel Stark, I look at the letter. If you appear in 3 days, you appear in Bremerhaven, you can board the ship to go to America. And I never registered, I never did this. So anyhow, I was in such a terrible mood. It was such a Morish Choira at that time that I was in. So I was so disgusted, and I was so distraught that I said, hell with it. I can always go to Eretz Yisrael another way. And I decided to take the boat. And I went to the boat, and I met other Yankel Rice over there and so forth, in Zelig Spun. Zelig Spun also, who I met on the boat. We're about 8 or 10 boys that were Shomer Shabbos and also needed kosher food that were boarding that, which was called the Ernie Pile. It was an army ship for America. And we arrived to New York, and they kept us in a terrible place in the Bronx someplace. And I was, again, the whole leader of this group. And I went to the Federation, which were in charge of our arrival here in America. And I went to the Federation and says, what are you keeping us in that dirty place in the Bronx? Don't you have a nicer place where you can keep us? He says, well, you are 8 or 10 boys. You all need kashrus, you all need kosher food. And we don't have a place where we can house you except here. And finally, I says, you better find another place because this is terrible. This is not right. And they 2 days later, they came, we can ship you to Cleveland. In Cleveland, there was a place called Belfair, which was a place built by the Federation. And they had about, beautiful place, they had about 10, 12 cottages in Belfair. And they housed us in 2 of these cottages with kosher food. And they gave us also a teacher to teach us English. And at the same time, I also discovered, being there a few days, that there's a Telzer Yeshiva in Cleveland. So I said to my friends, listen, we have enough food, we're learning English, but what about in the evenings? Maybe we can see what's going on in the yeshiva. The yeshiva was not, and where they Telzer Yeshiva is later, it was 105th Street in Cleveland. So we showed up in the yeshiva, and I met somebody there who was from Munkach, who was in charge of the kitchen. And he recognized me, knew my parents. And finally he says, oh, it's like you must come every evening. We'll give you supper here and you'll eat. And if you want to learn, you will learn. If you don't want to learn. So we started coming in every evening. We had a very good supper, and we were, his name was Margulis, Mr. Margulis from Munkach. He was in charge of the kitchen in Pelt. So we learned there. We were about a year, almost a year, a little less than a year. And finally, Jack Reese got a call from somebody in Chicago. If he wants, there's a family that would like to house some of these remnants of the Sheres Plata. I don't call the kids that survived. So some of the remnants of the Sheres Plata. So he told me, I'm only going if you come with me. I says, nobody invited me. He says, you were invited, so why don't you go? And if you like it, you feel it's a nice place, and somebody will also want to take me in for then I'll follow you. And sure enough, I followed him. So we arrived here in Chicago, and we started. We all lived in the South Side in Hyde Park. Hyde Park was a very nice Jewish community. There was some very good, nice Rabbonim in Hyde Park. Rabbi Moshkin was there, and Rabbi Peretz, and so forth. They were very, very interesting shuls and people. I made a lot of friends from the University of Chicago and so forth. So I fortunately, again, Chasdei Hashem, that I came into an environment still where people were observing kashrus and mitzvahs and so forth, even though at a young age, God forbid I could have fallen into who knows where. But it seems to me that it was also going from stage to stage, and it was all the way the Rebbeinu Shalom feared. This was carrying it out till the end. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much.
How did you meet Ethel?
What?
How did you meet Ethel?
Oh, how did I meet Ethel? Through a shadchan?
Oh,
A shadchan, right. There was I was in the business already, and there was somebody, I did businesses from New York. He was also a Mukacher. Her name was Frankel, Ira Frankel. Ira Frankel says, I have a beautiful girl for you. And I said, I heard that before. But you got to go to New York. And I went to New York quite often. And I said, okay, maybe I'll take a chance. I'll waste an hour and meet her. But it would cost me more than an hour after that. So I met her in the evening of the end of the year. It was around Christmas time, and I met her, and then I came back to Chicago, and as I said, it was not easy because telephones were very expensive, but nevertheless we used to write letters too. So till eventually I felt that it's time that that maybe it was shared for each other. So we married. And thank God we're going along. We're still married. Any other questions? So that's how I got to Chicago, not willingly, believe me. It was not my plan. It just worked out that way.
I want to thank you so much, Rabbi Saul.
You're very welcome.
It was very, very important and very meaningful for all of us, and hopefully for you too.
Thank you. It was.
You opened our eyes, and also I think you touched our hearts. So we want to wish you many more years in good health, and thank you again.
Thank you very much for inviting me and for being here. I think it's important. You are to listen, and important for future generations to let them know that we have to remember Zocher Ma'usul Chamolik. The Zocher is not only on Purim time or on so forth, but it's a mitzvah say to remember almost every day. So we are talking about to remember something which happened thousands of years ago. Allah has kamu b'kamu. I think we have to remember Chorm Europe, which happened about 75, 80 years ago. And anyhow, this is I have been doing my share, my chelik, to see that it's transferred over from generation to generation.
Thank you, thank you. I'm gonna end the Zoom. Thank you for everyone.
You're very
joining the
welcome.
Zoom. See you
That was
next time.
interesting.